We are here with Tony Rodrigues. Welcome to the show, Tony.
Hi, Jack. How you doing? It's good to see you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, yeah, it's good to see you. You've been doing a lot of things. You're out there in Sedona now, and you used to live in Michigan. Is that correct?
That's right. I'm born and raised in Michigan. I'm originally from the Ann Arbor, Ypsi area, and I was living in Cadillac, Michigan, up north, and recently relocated here to Sedona. It's been an adventure. I'll leave it at that. Sedona's a magical place.
100%. Yeah, I used to live there. It was quite an amazing place. It was recommended by a friend who also recommended Nevada City, California, as kind of a community of soulful, let's say, organic food types who would,
It's
you
true.
know, you could call them hippies for want of a better word, but I don't think they're quite hippies anymore in
They've moved
Sedona.
beyond that. It's
Yeah,
true.
yeah, 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 yeah. But they're still doing organic food, which is good because you got to keep the temple running.
Yeah, Sedona's all about spirituality and how and alternative things. Like it's okay to talk about a lot of subjects people call woo here. So, you go down the street and it's like coffee and crystals and there's aura readings and psychic readings, like all down the middle of town. And those businesses thrive here. There's a lot of alternative healing technologies, places set up. It's just a place where people come and thrive, and they thrive here doing it.
A lot of Reiki practitioners, a lot of massage workers.
Yes,
And then you show up from Michigan. You're probably like trying to get people to listen to you on the streets of Michigan, and no one wants to hear it because they're like, hey, we're from Michigan. We don't need to know about psychoenergetics. But in Sedona, everyone's probably like, wait, psychoenergetics, tell me more.
exactly. So I can tell people in Michigan, I'd be at the coffee shop and people go, "What do you do?" And I say, "Well, I teach remote viewing." And they would go, "Okay, have a nice day." And in Sedona, they say, "What do you do?" And I say, "Well, I teach remote viewing." They go, "Oh, that's interesting. Where do I sign? Where do I find more on that?" So that's the difference culturally between here and most of the places, I think, in the U.S. It's just people that are kind of open-minded and went down the rabbit hole already find their way here, gravitate here.
Right. And of course, this is nothing against the good folks of Michigan. It's just that it's a different way of looking at the world. Most of the world right now, I think, is as it has been for so long. We're all in survival mode. So, but then you go to some place like Sedona, where they're like, okay, we might have our survival part of our life that we have to take care of, but we're going to spend some time trying to figure out what's really going on in the world because they didn't tell us that in high school.
No. And they told us where not to look in high school. They gave you a bunch of stuff to worry about that had nothing to do with anything, it seems. So they want us dumb. Makes sense. And when you're talking about ruling over a class of people or a populace of people, you don't want them smarter than you.
You want them really good at algebra.
Yeah. I gotta tell you, I never was until now. I've been using the AI, and now I can solve complex math problems with AI. So I'm not a physicist, so you know what I mean? But I always had the problems in my head, and I didn't have the math to do it. And now I'm able to solve complex things by using the AI systems that are available, and it's kind of nice. It's really helped me develop a lot of cool stuff.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because you've had a few interviews with Dan Winter and you've been sort of probing his work, his scientific work on the nature of the universe, the fundamental nature of how things work. And it's pretty amazing watching you in real time grapple with this stuff that's really, really hard to handle. When people interview Dan, they say, they always say the same thing. Can you say it like it's for a 4 year old or a 5 year old or a 10 year old or a high school student? And he goes, sure. And then he doesn't change at all. He just keeps going with these terms that are so hard to handle. But you then recently created a computer generated image of what he's been talking about. And he was so amazed by this
Yes, and let me see if I have it here. I think I mailed it to myself yesterday.
because I think remote viewing might depend on this very process that your model shows.
Everything does. So Dan is very talented, and his theory, his conclusions on charge collapse actually do apply to everything that we experience in our life. We are made out of charge. I guess a lot of people don't have a good idea of what the macro universe is. So you look up, you see galaxies. You can see galaxies, and they show the Laniakea cluster of galaxies, and then the known universe. Like there's lots of animations that show going from a single cell from DNA, and then it comes by times 10, and then you come up to the cell, to the person's eyeball, and then it goes out to the park, and then the world. And then most people don't look at beyond that, smaller than DNA, which is there's actually a great amount of distance between the smallest pieces of charge, the protons, and what DNA is made out of. So it's the same. It would be akin to the difference between us and the size of a cluster of galaxies. So everything is made out of charge, ultimately. When you zoom in, you go way down to the Planck distance, which is the shortest distance anywhere in the universe. The next thing up it's unified field theory or ether theory, and they surmise that turbulence in this positive and negative field of ether at that low level creates protons. And so it's just a turbulence, it's a swirl, it's a torus, a toroid. It's a toroidal field. And it creates a turbulence. There's a charge going this way and a charge going this way, or however they interact, and they have a turbulence, and that makes a proton. It's just a spinning ball of charge. And it gives off so much, it's spinning so fast that it gives off electromagnetic pull on the next one. And if one was a beach ball the size of 1 meter, the next one is 10 kilometers away. So that's how far apart the protons are. They clump together and begin to make smaller things like neutrons and electrons and smaller particles. And that's where we get our quantum world from. They come and go from these turbulences. And then molecules. And the molecules clump together, and that's what I'm staring at now. It's a picture of my clump of molecules talking to your clump of molecules, water and skin and muscle and proteins and that. Charge happens when you're thinking. Light waves, sound waves, electrical waves. When you think, so watch this. You're thinking right now, you're listening to me, your brain is behaving a certain way, and you're giving off charge. Ice cream. Now you're giving off a different charge. You're giving off a different brainwave because you thought about ice cream for a second, or the last, however it pertains to you. But what I'm saying, what the demonstration is that your brain changed charge, the wavelength that came out of it. As waves permeate and bump into other things, some of them breaks off and collapses. Charge collapse. And what Dan says is that the waves that collapse in a spiral by the math of the golden mean, so they dissipate at the rate of the distance it's going and the speed divided by 1.6184. So that's the golden ratio. And
Right.
so
The
it dissipates
Fibonacci.
again.
That's the Fibonacci series.
It's close. It's close. It's not exact because Fibonacci was only a few he's decimal points off. So some of it changes. The Fibonacci isn't exactly the golden ratio from the Planck distance when you talk about the big math, but it's
Okay.
close. It's very close. Fibonacci's think about it as based on 1 inch, and the actual number is 1.0024 inches. So it's a little off.
Okay.
Uh, but anyhow, when it does that, when the charge dissipates exactly at that ratio down the fractal of electrons, that the universe, all the electrons in the universe are arranged in a fractal pattern of a dodeca.
Like a tree branches. That's what fractal means. It's branching, right?
Like the tree right behind you, there's a bunch of dodecas. When I look at it, I see a bunch of dodeca shapes piled on each other.
Got it.
Uh, It fractals all the way down. So the charge follows these clouds of electrons in the dodeca at a perfect angle. And the ones that make it get to the Planck distance precisely, and they can click out of time space.
And
And
that's
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 gravity.
and that's what remote viewing is essentially clicking out of time space.
That's right. That's where the data is on the other side of the Planck distance. The Planck is like a screen, a window screen, or a pixels on a television screen, but it's 3D, so it's probably a dodeca shape. But imagine a window screen, and your brainwave is this. You go, I want to see, I want a remote view, and because I'm mad at Jock, I want to see what he did wrong to me. And my brainwave bounces off the screen. The hole in the screen is this big, but my brainwave is bigger, and it bounces off, and nothing happens.
Hmm.
But then I say, I'm not worried, Jacques. I just want to help him out. He's my buddy. I'm going to enter a meditative state of peace. And now my brainwave is a different size, and it goes down by the golden ratio, and that hole in the Planck distance, it fits through. And now I have a communication with all the data that's on the other side of the screen, window screen of the whole universe. So it's outside of time space. So that's what psychic phenomenon is. That's what gravity is. Light does it. Furthermore, if you think about that, a being on the other side of it only sees the brain waves of peace and love and light, and they only see there's a filter for the being on the other side of time space, outside of time space. They don't see anger and hatred and fear and doubt. Those brainwaves don't make it. So if we were on the other side, we would only see certain things. So there's a context that's missing because of the science of the brain of these. And we're talking about charge, brain waves, light waves, sound waves, electrical waves, EM waves, pulses, all of it. We're talking about the way that charge behaves, and brain waves and every all the other waves follow the same physics. And that's the nutshell of Dan's theory of what he showed. And then when you do the math on other things, the way gravity works, he can accurately plot the orbits of the planets, size of the Earth, the way that things interact, the shape of the galaxies, the shape of hurricanes, the shape of the drain faucet. These are all obeying the same physics, and we see it time and time and time again. And when we really look at charge and the way that the waves interact on during collapse or the ones that are not collapsing, you can begin to limit and turn up other. You can begin to turn up waves that help that are collapsing, the ones you want. You can turn those up, and you can turn down the ones that are interfering. And I've done that with my remote viewing groups, and we've had tremendous results.
Is that turning up the love vibration?
No, it's just creating an environment with less transverse EMF and turning up wavelengths that collapse to the Planck. So you can bombard them. You can make. I've taken. This is another long one to explain, and I haven't got the website up with the commercial. I want to make a video that explains all this with an animation, not my mug on the video. That explains it, but I reversed engineered basically ancient obelisks. Remember in my book, I was talking about obelisks being psychoenergetic monuments. When I really started looking at how that works and plugging that in and doing the math, the complicated math, like I said, they can do so much more. And essentially, what I can do with the ones I've built here in my house, and I'm building more, they'll be offered on my website, scion.com. They can bombard harmonics of a certain frequency so that they can turn a harmonic into static electricity. So the static electricity that is tuned to the harmonic you want that can collapse to the Planck creates an environment that you're in where you're bombarded with electrons that are collapsing to the Planck automatically. And it really does make remote viewing easier and other things. You can also tune it to the same harmonic that your cells give off when they divide. So when your cells in your body divide, there's an electric response. At the moment they divide, they give off a harmonic, and you can tune to that harmonic and fool your body into thinking that it has cell growth happening, and it begins to create new cells. Cellular negentropy, Dan calls it. And I've had great success with that. I sleep with it. At first, I was doing it overnight. I had a obelisk made with my formula that is made out of, and I'm broadcasting that harmonic into it. And I started feeling better. I mean, big time, fast. And then after a few weeks of it, now I let it run 24/7. It's always on in the house. And you can kind of feel the range to it. It's only 20 feet or so. You can feel when you walk in the room. Maybe it's a placebo, who knows? But I've had great success with it, and I've had a lot of problems go away. So put it that way. So there's a lot of technology there. I found that the ancient ones that if you tune it right, you can purify water with a harmonic. I'm That's a bigger project to recreate it and start take a sample of water that's got bacteria in it and then run the harmonic in front of it and then take a clean and then analyze it. It's like I don't have the lab equipment for that, but that's a bigger um, experiment. But I am going to get to that. So it also takes a specific size of an obelisk versus the creating a cascade harmonic inside. Sorry, now I'm starting to use big words. Sorry.
Hey, no, we it's okay.
But I hope that's works. Does that explain kind of? I could have swore I had the animation from Dan's that we built. So the other thing is, I couldn't understand what he was saying. I got him a set of virtual reality goggles and mailed them to him. And then I taught him how to get in there. And I went in and I created his star mother. I recreated a three-dimensional star mother where we could actually stand inside of it and zoom in. And I created that, and then I got him in there with me, and I said, "Now show me where charge. Now show me on this thing what you're talking about. Show me phase conjugate pump waves and charge collapse." And he did. Then seeing it in a microscopic, the size of a hydrogen molecule, basically it was a hydrogen molecule or close to one, and watching the way that charge travels along the nodes of a hydrogen molecule into the fractal and how it collapses down all the way to the Planck. Then all of a sudden it made perfect sense, and you understand the importance of tuning things, light, sound, your thoughts of tuning things like that really changes your experience. And then I made Scion.com, and I started to make binaurals for the learning company that I have that we're working on. So I sound like I got a lot of irons in the fire. Jeez. There's a learning company. Binaurals are like a major component of the learning method for that, having a 6 minutes of binaural at the beginning of a course that's kind of tuned to the mindset of the course. So I had the software in place I was making binaurals, and then when Dan did that and showed me that, I applied that to the frequencies of the binaurals, and it had such a tremendous impact. I've made out products for a successful mindset. There's a healing one. There's a energy defense one, like a suit up, I call it. Like if you're going to go into the negotiate, buy a used car, or you're going to, the bully's waiting for you at the playground. I made one that, to kind of suit up to kind of pump you up, and one for remote viewing. And we've had great results in the remote viewing one. These are harmonics that are tuned to dissipate to the Planck distance, to collapse to the Planck, and you really can tell the difference. So when a regular binaural it goes you go, it's okay, it's not that bad. And then when you hit the frequency that collapses, you go, that feels good. That sounds good. That's the sensation. And that's when I knew I was onto something. And they've been a huge success. So Scion.com, Psion.com. I've got three of them up there now. I'm going to have the obelisk up there, and the rest of the binaurals are going to be on there. So they've been they've been doing well. People are very happy, pleased with them, and I've had a lot of good feedback.
Well, for people who don't know what binaural technology is, I think it was Robert Monroe who first brought this to our attention through the Monroe Institute. He wrote a book called Journeys Out of the Body. I think that was back in the 70s. And that was a huge, huge bestseller. So people were like, "Wait, we can journey out of our bodies." And so he was a pioneer. So you're saying that you've sort of you found a way after what you've learned from Dan Winter to improve on this binaural technology.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Binaurals, the hemisync. Your hemispheres of your brain happen to have a different hertz they don't after a while, sometimes they can be out of sync and not talk to each other. So you ever been tongue-tied? You can visualize the picture of what you want to talk about, but I just can't form the words.
Yeah.
It's because the picture is on one hemisphere of the brain and the word is on the other, and they're not talking. So when you listen to hemisync, you see the picture and go, "Oh, it's a beautiful rose petal ball that's glistening down." Like you can come up with the words
Yeah.
because you're hemisync. So the hertz, and they do it by playing a tone in one ear, say 10 hertz, and they play 5 hertz in the other ear, and the difference is the sync of 5 hertz. So that's kind of the basics of hemisync. But what I started doing was tuning the hertz to the Planck, to charge collapse, the math of golden ratio to the Planck distance on the cascade that Dan came up with. And Dan's cascade goes in a certain direction. I used AI to get down to the nanometer, and really, you know what I mean, saying to make a larger cascade in the kilohertz, which is what I think the ancient Egyptians were using. They were using kilohertz with drums. I call it 28 drums. It takes 28 beats per second to have a harmonic cascade resonance happen and create kilohertz sounds, like ultrasonic sounds, out of an obelisk or an ancient granite monument. So 28 beats per second with a large drum, and it was timed and positioned right around the monument. It would create a cascade, a harmonic resonance cascade, and it would emit a kilohertz sound that people can't hear, and it would purify water. So about three-quarters of a mile away, whatever water was around there, where the waves went out and crossed, it would cause microcavitation and oxygenate and sterilize the water.
And this is 28 kilohertz you're talking about?
Mm. Nope, it's 227 and some change kilohertz
Okay.
is the wavelength. So the major clue we have is the size of the array of the Karnak Temple and the Florence, Italy, the Boboli Gardens and the Vatican obelisk and the Kazakhstan's obelisks and the Washington Monument and the St. Louis Arch and countless other monuments around the world that are set up. They're generating ultrasonic waves and purifying water is exactly what these things can do. Among other things. Like I don't want to just list the whole thing. It's more than it's a Swiss Army knife of technology. There's a lot it can do. And when you talk about broadcasting harmonics through one of these monuments that are all made out of quartz, have a high quartz content.
So you on your website scion.com, you have created well lots of different things, but one of the things you're working with is obelisks. The obelisk, you're saying you make them out of quartz?
Yes, and other things. So there's a magnetic component as well. I did the math. This was one of those things I used AI to crunch the numbers on the math. So you can tune the obelisk to certain frequencies better than others. Any obelisk will can take a frequency and when you put it through piezo can broadcast the harmonic. But if you tune it really right, you can get a harmonic cascade and really amplify the effect. So the ones I've built aren't necessarily tuned. They're tuned, and I'm experimenting with it because you can read the field with volts per meter. You can see actually with a trimeter where the field is around them. They're not on Scion yet, so they're coming. I got some pretty large items of laboratory equipment being delivered, and I had to save up money to buy the stuff. Like it's all out of pocket, so I had to save up for the last few months while I was reading about the stuff. But the quartz, when you think about it like this, when we talk about, let's take the Vatican obelisk. It's
Yeah.
at the Vatican. It's right in the middle of the square. If, for instance, you had a drum, a large drum, a frame drum, like the old Indians had, like the Egyptians had, and you were in the right place around the obelisk, you would want 28 beats per minute. What happens is the sound wave. Let me get a little obelisk here. This is my obelisk, and it's got a quartz. It's 60% quartz. It's got ferrous material, so it's got a magnetic field that aids in the direction of the electrons that are given off from the piezo. So, boom, I say, boom, I'm a drum, and I can go boom, 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 boom. And my sound waves hit the obelisk. Well, when you squeeze quartz, if you've ever beaten two pieces of quartz together, they leave a flash of light. They emit electricity. So on a small level, when a sound wave hits an obelisk, the quartz in it emits an electric field, static
That,
electricity.
and that's the piezoelectric effect.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. And that's what it turns out that that's what we have going on upstairs when we're thinking. It's a piezoelectric. We have a crystal in our head called the pineal gland. When a sound wave hits it, the quartz inside of it emits electricity close to the same hertz of the sound wave. So when you cause a harmonic cascade, you hit sound waves, hit it in the right way, the whole thing vibrates. And as it vibrates, another wave hits it this way, another wave hits it this way. In succession, you time it right. It's like a tuning fork. It starts to ring and it creates a completely different hertz than the wave they input. That's how they're generating the kilohertz wave. And it's not in sound. It's in piezoelectricity. It's in static electricity that it starts to emit static electricity. And in that field, the electrons that it's emitting are collapsing to the plank. So it creates a field that you're standing in that is rich in an environment that is speaking to the outside of time space. So you can tune it to do that. In the instance of water treatment, they're creating a 227 kilohertz wave that's three-quarters of a mile long. The wave itself is three-quarters of a mile long, and where the wave crosses at the end is where you get the optimum effect on microcavitation of water. It makes little bubbles in the water, and it oxygenates the water and it kills the bad guys, the bacteria. And anybody thinks that I'm being crazy, this guy's crazy. You can look at the history. The obelisk was erected in 1550 at the Vatican. And in the year 1500, people were dying. It was a mass epidemic of water quality in Rome. That was their biggest problem because they were dumping sewage into the Tiber River, and water quality was hell. And then 25 years after the obelisk, you can look at the water quality, and they had solved it. So after the obelisk was erected, they brought aqueducts in. The Tiber River was much cleaner, but still not healthy to drink. It was cleaned up, but all the aqueducts in the city had clean water. So this was part of the Pope's water engineering and there's paperwork, there's a paper trail. That's what I've been working on lately, man.
Well, Ken Rolla went out to the Bosnian pyramids and he did some research and I interviewed him and he's in the complex and he said the Bosnian pyramid of the sun, because it's made of crystalline clay and because the pyramid is so massive and so heavy, the weight of the pyramid itself is creating the piezoelectric effect.
That's right. And that's why the obelisks are the base is usually the same material. So it is creating a piezo effect. And if you leave it be and don't give it any sound or any kind of input, then it's giving off the Schumann resonance. So the Earth's natural Schumann is being broadcast from it, which is also a meditative state. So when you talk about putting it near the Basilica at the Vatican and it does nothing, it's in dead silence, it is giving off the 7.83, the Schumann resonance, which also is a one of the harmonics that collapses exactly to the Planck distance. 7.83 divided by the golden ratio all the way down to the Planck distance is works. It's one of the big ones. It's doing that automatically. So that's why when you probably, I imagine when he walks in there, he feels very peaceful.
Well, in the Ravne tunnel system, what I call Ravne tunnel labyrinth, and I've done a lot of videos on this so people can check it out on Bosnian pyramids on YouTube. Semir talks continually about the 7.83 Schumann resonance healing energy in the tunnel system. So getting below or inside the pyramid complex is really healing, not just for the Schumann resonance, but also for the negative ion count, which is higher than any place else on Earth except at big waterfalls like Niagara and other places.
So there's water going through it?
It's a damp environment, and there are water channels off the sides of this tunnel labyrinth.
So aerated water gives off negative ions.
Right. So it's really damp in there. And when we show videos of orbs, people always go, oh, that's just dust. And it's like, if you've been there, you know it's not dust because everything is damp in there. And the orbs are moving independently of wind because there's no wind because there's only one entrance, there's no exit. So the exit is the entrance, the entrance is the exit. So there's no wind in there. It's really damp, everything's wet. If you dig down on this flat, Ravne means flat, and if you dig down 3 inches on the path you're walking on throughout the tunnel system, you'll find water.
Right. So that's where it's coming from. So the other thing is because it's under that mass of clay, it's also blocking the transverse EMF, which also dissipates those. So when you talk about the 7.83, those Schumann, so it's creating a piezo effect. Like I said, an environment rich in electrons that are actively collapsing to the Planck. So it works, when you take like a Tesla coil and it's shooting lightning into the air, it's random. So all of those electrons with billions and billions, trillions of electrons that are firing off, most of them don't dissipate by golden mean to the Planck. But some of them do. It's like ping pong. It's like unleashing a million ping pong balls up a hill, and there's one little cup. Some balls are going to make it in the cup, right? So, it's a numbers game. A billion ping pong balls and a cup at the end of the hill. Somebody's going in the cup. Piezo that's happening in that pyramid is creating billions and billions more ping pong balls of electrons and that are collapsing to the Planck, that are making it. And essentially, the cup is the Planck distance, and you have, you can tune in and make a bunch in there, but you're also creating many, many. So when you're standing in a cloud of this, your own thoughts, your own electrons have a shortcut or an easier access to the Planck distance. So you can go into a meditative state, you can do all kinds of, it opens the door. It opens the door to so many things. And our natural state with the 5G and our Wi-Fi and all these lights and this computer and the house has got wiring all through it, our natural state is the opposite. There are fewer ping pong balls making it into the cup in your home. And that's what the obelisk that I do creates a field of ping pong balls, all making many, many, many millions of ping pong balls going into the plank distance cup. And it creates a small field just like that. It's like a home version.
Nice. Well, you wrote this book. It's your third book.
Third book.
And it's called Beyond Sight: The Hidden History of Remote Viewing and Psychoenergetics. That's a
And
beautiful title. That's a really strong, amazing title. It makes me want to read it. I didn't actually buy it yet. I should have done that to research for this interview, but I'm not as organized as one would hope. So, tell us about your book and tell us about what's on the other side of that Planck distance. You mentioned that is it? Are you talking about the fifth density realm? Is that what's on the other side of the Planck distance?
I got to tell you, I'm lost in all the density talk. Everybody's got a different name for it. Out time, subspace mind, outside of time space, the absolute infinity, whatever you want to call it. We are bound by time. Everybody says time's an illusion. It is when you're outside of time space. When you're on the other side, time doesn't matter. That's why we can remote view the future accurately and the past accurately and great distance. Time space doesn't isn't there. It's all one big medium. It could be one consciousness for all we know. It could be us over there. But we are locked in time space. I have to wake up tomorrow morning and be a little bit older, a little grayer. Sun's going to come up. It might be rainy. It might not. This time works for us. Also, I have to navigate space. So I have to get up and walk to the bathroom and walk to the kitchen and make my coffee. And so, you know what I mean? We are navigating time and space. On the other side, we're not. So that's my conclusion. So on the other side of the Planck distance, we're not navigating time and space. And we have access when we remote view. I have 4 teams of remote viewers currently, and they're kicking butt. They all have great scores. The last 2 months, we've just been knocking it out of the park. The great thing about remote viewing is it's confirmable. So, if the target is this pen as the Eiffel Tower in my planter in my living room, and everybody describes it and says that there's a pen and a plant in the living room, and they didn't know it was a double blind, it's confirmable that they were accessing data through psychoenergetic means. So it's confirmable. You can't argue to it. And we do it every week. We do it every single week. We beat the odds. So there's a thing there. So playing with that kind of led me into my book Beyond Sight is about my discovery of my activities in remote viewing in the first stop in my 20 and back. Right. So that's a mouthful. But I went back to the place in Inyokern physically, and I got memories of what the program I was on, and then I began to research it and found the paper trail and had enough to write a book. I also, in chapter 3 of my book, is based on psychoenergetic monuments, where I extrapolated the obelisks were like Vogel crystals. I referenced Marcel Vogel's work and a university that studied his work and postulated that they can use those obelisks to imbue water with mental intentions. So they can make it to where everybody that drinks the water downstream, it gets sleepy or happy or hungry or whatever. But I found since I wrote the book, so the science after I built my own obelisk and started really experimenting with it, and then understanding Dan's sciences of charge collapse, I found out that the obelisks are capable of so much more. It's not just a one purpose machine that the ancients had or that is at the Vatican right now. There's not just it's a Swiss Army knife of psychoenergetics possible thing. There's so many things we can do with it. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing this year. Getting Scion.com only has 3 binaurals available on it right now, and people are very happy with them, but they'll be added more. I'm going to have as much as 12 to 14 binaurals on there, and we're going to shortly have obelisks and the harmonics and some of the ingredients. It turns out by buying the laboratory equipment that is necessary to make these obelisks, I'm going to end up with raw materials left over that you can't buy. So I may be offering them through Scion, like particleized barium titanate and nano quartz particles. You can't get that stuff, but I have to get the machines to be able to make it. So I might list it for sale just because I went through so much trouble to find it. Barium titanate's very hard to get.
Well, for people who don't know about the Vogel crystals, Marcel Vogel was sort of a lone wolf pioneer who was shaping existing crystals to specific geometrical tolerances. And then Dan Willis, I believe, has furthered his work in modern day.
Yes, Dan is working on the same kind of stuff through a crystal and trying to amplify it. And so is Dan Winter. So everybody's working on these crystals to come out with stuff. And I was already on the obelisks. And what I realized was that the obelisks were as much as 60% quartz and had the same shape, rough shape of the Vogel crystal. The Vogel crystal works better to be six-sided more than any other one. The obelisks are four-sided because it's not solid crystal. It's a polycrystalline structure, meaning there's particleized crystal all through it. So the shape doesn't necessarily have to be a six-sided. But I was going in that route, and then along the same thing, like I said, I've had great results with the machine. I hung out here in Sedona, and a lot of people make PEMF devices here. There's eye pyramids with Jason Stiles, a very established business. There's Rion DeRoan from Team Light, who's making pyramid. They make pyramids that are PEMF and do have some piezo, I believe. I'm not. Don't quote me on that. But these guys are established businesses, and people love their products. They can create a field that's very relaxing, and score really high when you look at it, the magnetic field around it with a trimeter. So these are good things that I've learned from these guys, and that kind of set me in my own way. Dan Willis is working on a shroud. I mean, I haven't talked to him. It's all open source for a crystal and a pure crystal cut. But theirs, it's my understanding, is kind of like power generation. So 0 point energy and power frill generation for life force. And it's a different animal than what I'm doing. But I've had results. The thing is, I have one working here in the house, and I'll be damned if the thing works. I've had people come over and say, "Sit by that. Tell me, do you feel anything?" And they're like, "Oh God, whoa, I can feel that." And they move something, that you can make an array with them. So I've had great results. I think a lot of people, I think it's not for everybody, but I think a lot of people are going to really appreciate and benefit from the obelisk that I'm going to build and be offering.
Awesome. Well, Elena Denon and Dan Willis got together, I don't know, about a year ago, and Thor Hahn was kind enough to check in with his superiors and ask them if it's okay if he tells the Terrans how to make a certain crystal and how it works, and they gave him the permission to do that, even though it's sort of like in Star Trek when they break the prime directive and they interfere in a developing culture. And for the drama of the show, it's always great to do that. But so he got permission to give us some really cool intel about crystals through Dan Willis.
Yes. And like I said, and that's what they're going. He calls it frill energy. Dan Winter has his fire crystal out, which I haven't experimented with, but everybody says it does great. These guys are developing this technology. Maybe it's just time for this to come out. Like I said, I don't make any claim that I'm like them or not like them. I've learned from both of them. I've really followed their work, and that's what I mean. Like, I'm a guy that came out and told my story from the secret space program. I wrote my first book, and I got to go to conferences. I met you, right? And I got to go to conferences and rub elbows with people, and I got to meet the Dans. I got to meet Elena, and in casual conversation, learn from them and actually follow up. And things that I've learned, I've put together in my own way, and that's where I'm at. Right? So I owe it all to the ability to tell my story, just to be on the road and tell my story. And so, um, yeah, that's how I ended up here, man. Here I am, 10 years later.
Yeah, and you have such a positive, forward-moving energy. It's fantastic. Here's your two of your books. The first two, well, the first one was Series Colony Cavalier, then came Project Star Maker. And if people want to pick these up, they're really, really amazing books. And I don't normally buy physical books. I just sort of grab a PDF somewhere and try to save money. But I was like, I'm going to splurge on this because this is important stuff. And so I'm gonna grab your book soon, your new one, Beyond Sight. It's an amazing title because academia would tell us that don't worry about it if it's beyond sight. That's just nonsense. That's just woo woo. We know what's out there because we can see it, and it's like no, actually, if you look into your own discipline of physics, we have a spectrum that the visible light spectrum is about this big, and the spectrum is about this big of energetic waves
We don't
that
see
that
much.
can be accessed. Yeah. So what we're looking at with visible light is like a tiny fraction. And David Icke talks about this all the time. He's like, what we can perceive is a tiny fraction of what's out there. And that's why these advanced, much older races can exist outside of our visual range.
There's a lot we don't see. Most of everything we don't see. We're limited to the size of a wavelength, that are rods in our core, that are cones in our rods. The size of them is the smallest wavelength we can see, and the size of our pupil is the biggest wavelength we can see. So everything else we don't see. There are wavelengths. Like I said, the kilohertz wavelength is 3/4 of a mile long. So you'd need an eyeball 3/4 of a mile big. You'd need a pupil 3/4 of a mile big to see that color or that wave. Well, I think we're all going to squeeze through the plunk eventually. I think that's what happens to us when we go. And your brainwaves, your state matters. You know, only the good people go to heaven. It's when you take the science and you look back in antiquity, they're saying the same thing. Only
Ah, I
certain
see.
brainwaves make it to the Planck distance to make it out to heaven, and other ones don't. They bounce and have to come back. And so that's what we hear in religions and philosophy and on and on and on. Wise tales and legend, all of it. The science is starting to line up.
Right. A love frequency. Dan talks about this, Dan Winter. A love frequency will get you through the Planck to the other side.
Yes. Well, so that brainwave frequency divides by the golden ratio down. When you put somebody on a brainwave scanner, that's the brainwave, though, in a peace or peace. How many people have you heard died peacefully in their sleep or died peacefully with their family at their side? Peace is also the brainwave. So a neutral brainwave where you're not thinking of anything, where you're at peace. So the worst thing you can do is be worrying about something when you die. Like, oops, ooh, I didn't mean to do that. I screwed that up. Whoops. So that brainwave state doesn't transfer. That's going to keep you sticking around to come back for more. So that's kind of how it works. I don't know. I don't want to start a culty thing, and I don't want to sway anybody's opinion of what happens. But I know that as you get towards the end of your life, your state of mind matters. If you're going to be peaceful and loving or regretful and hateful, that literally does matter. It literally matters to what you're going to your next step in life.
Well, if people want to research this further, they can watch your interviews with Dan Winter, where you have a great conversation with him for an hour or two at a time, and these videos are amazing. And then use that as a bridge to watch Dan Winter's stuff. He's got tons and tons of stuff where he talks about what you just said in detail and the physics behind what you just said. It's really, really beautiful. And the anthropological the historical evidence for this in the histories of different cultures where they're talking about exactly what you're talking about. So they knew this somehow before our physics came around to figure this out. And this is new physics outside of really, it's outside of academia still, right? It's not.
Well, when we talk about an obelisk set up in an array that can generate a kilohertz wave that can cause water purification, there is no way possible you can discover that without an extensive laboratory. So the ancients had this. The ancient Egyptians had this at Karnak. There's no laboratory. So you see what I'm saying? Like there is absolutely no way they discovered this by just, hey, if we play these drums for these hours and everybody sits there, the water down the street and a mile away gets purified because they accidentally made a granite statue in Aswan. Like they did not discover this through random happenstance. You have to have an extensive library and academic, you know, you had to have you had like I'm doing it with AI. Like I don't have the ability to learn it myself. If it wasn't for AI doing the math, I wouldn't have the ability to do this. And so these are ancient Egyptians. These are 6,000 years ago people. It to me it looks like it was the remnants that they had advanced technology knowledge, but they had stone age tools. Like it was a post-apocalyptic world. Like an advanced age, an advanced civilization got destroyed, and the people that were left over began building things with the technology they had on hand, with stone age technology and slaves or conscripted people, whatever it was. So it looks like at one point, like somewhere like the Atlantis thing is probably true. Like there was an advanced civilization that got destroyed, and their survivors passed the knowledge on, and they started to build monuments based on these sciences, sound wave and charge collapse, and these things, and they started to build these devices. And there is still a fraternity of them today because modern monument, the Astana town, the town of Astana in Kazakhstan, the capital city, is built entirely along these wavelengths. If you go look at it, it's an entire array, the same as Karnak, but more advanced, for arguably more advanced. So, and the St. Louis Monument, and the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and the Washington Monument. So there is a group of society that has this knowledge still to this day.
Right. So maybe we could say that in the Egyptian pyramids, the Giza Plateau structures, much longer ago than 6,000 years ago, there was an advanced race or group of races who built the larger structures and maybe even built the plateau itself to keep it above the flooding of the Nile. And then after some time, many thousands of years, another group came in, found these large structures. Maybe we call those the pharaohs, and they instituted a building of smaller pyramids. We use these little tiny crumbling pyramids around the larger pyramids and trying to emulate these large pyramids, but they didn't really know what the large pyramids were for, what they did. They're just going, hey, somebody built huge pyramids. We're going to do that too because we're awesome. And then all they could do was build crappy pyramids that didn't hold together because they didn't know what they're doing. So then
As
the
if,
Egypt, so the Egyptologists come along and they go, "Oh, the pharaohs built it all." And it's like, did they? I don't know.
well, it's like some of them understood the science and some of them didn't. So these are clearly machines, not gravestones. They have so
Right.
much knowledge in them, and it's on a level that we're only starting to understand today.
Right. And
Um,
then you've got those granite boxes inside the chambers in the Giza Plateau, and which how did they get them in there? Because the
that's
way in is too narrow for these boxes. Well, it makes sense then if they built the plateau and they set the boxes in as they built the plateau, then it makes sense. And then you go, well, that's a big project to build a plateau, but the people who could build those pyramids could build a plateau and keep it above the Nile flooding.
Yeah, there's a lot of engineering. Well, when we look at the Karnak temple, the another thing, it's funny we're not talking about space. When you look at the Karnak temple and what I'm talking about with purifying the water and oxygen, literally oxygenating the water, it's downriver. It's like, what is it, 100 miles down from the Giza. One of the mysteries of Egypt is that the ancient Egyptians had detailed records of their crop yields. And modern people they didn't have fertilizer, and even if we went there and fertilized it and used tractors, we can't get the yields that they were reporting every year. There's a missing element of technology to the Egyptian farming that is a mystery. And what I'm saying is they were treating the water downriver. They were treating the water and oxygenating it, and it was purified with no bacteria, and that was helping them and imbuing the water with mental intention, the same way that a Vogel crystal can. And so they were treating the water down the Nile. That's why the Nile was so blessed. The Karnak temple specifically was a water treatment plant that did many different things to the water, the entire river, and that's why they were giant obelisks. They were making huge obelisks, 80 meters or something. Am I saying that right? 80 meters tall. Some of the big one. Um, I think it's 24 meters. 75 feet is the Vatican one. If I'm saying that, I might be wrong on that. It doesn't matter. They're huge. They're absolutely massive, and they're all made out of the same granite from the Aswan quarry, which has a radioactive element to it. It has a ferrous magnetic element, and then mostly quartz, a quartz piezo element. So these are machines, and they didn't need to make a giant computer to do it. You could beat a drum by it and create sound waves and piezo waves that could affect the environment.
Right. So it's like a
Yeah.
machine with no moving parts that works in a subtle way, subtle in the sense that we can't see it working. We can't see the gears moving because there's no gears. And it's so much more sophisticated in that sense that it's not going to wear out because there's no moving parts.
They're still doing it today. They still work today just fine. And like I said, we see them all over the place. They were exported. And, the Vatican did it quickly. There's one in Boboli, in Florence, Italy, in the Boboli Gardens. And there's an entire array. The PT Palace is exactly the same as a harmonic acoustical array. The columns that are made out of the with a quartz component, I believe. And it's the same as the Karnak Temple, the columns. It's the same arrangement. The Washington Monument has the Veterans Memorial right there at the same distance, made out of quartz. We see these arrays all over the place, on and on and on. I'm just
Well,
trying to reverse engineer it. And what I'm saying is, I've had great results. I've reverse engineered them and made my own obelisk here with the quartz content and ferrous content, and I've had tremendous results with them. They're addictive. Put it that way. It's something where you go, man, it's not on. I kind of want to turn out like I want to run it all the time.
well, we've been going for about an hour. What's your time like? Do you feel like you're okay with this, or do you want to go longer?
Oh, this is okay. I feel like I gave a lot, and I feel like instead of talking about the space program and ETs and disclosure, I'm talking about the science that I'm working on, and I think it's a lot to digest. And when I think about dumping all this on somebody, but this is what I've been doing for the last 3 years of learning and researching this stuff, and and it all comes out of the remote viewing and my own secret space program experience, and so I feel like it's a lot.
Your time in the secret space program is fascinating, but as you say, you've done a lot of interviews about that and gone into great detail about your time, which I believe was 30 years total, or maybe 31 years. But what was the bridge for you in this life between your experience with the secret space program and starting to learn about remote viewing?
Well, so I went with Tyler Kawala, whom I know you've met. Is a great guy. He's him and Aaron do Journey to Truth podcast, and he wanted to he was making a documentary. He still is making a documentary, and I told him I wanted to go before the speaking year of 2023, before going on and starting to on the season of doing live talks. I wanted to visit another place that I remembered in my 20 and back. But I said the first time I went and I didn't film it, and it was a mistake because I would have had evidence. If people, I was telling things that I couldn't have known. So Tyler's like, "I'll go with you and film it. We'll make a documentary. Let's do it."
Just to be clear for people who don't know what you're talking about, your time in the secret space program included some time here on Terra.
Yeah, the first 6 or 7 years, 6 or 7 years in black programs on Earth. The first one being a remote viewing research program where they told us we were clones and we were kids, and they were doing remote viewing and psychoenergetic experiments on us in between Project Grill Flame and Center Lane in Annual Kern, California, at the airport there. So Tyler and I went there, met him in Vegas. We rented a truck and drove out, and we filmed it. We stayed in Ridgecrest a couple nights and went around town, and that was a whole strange adventure in its own. But I found the buildings exactly how I remembered. I found all the other buildings on site. I walked in and was actually saw the very first place I woke up. And while I was there, instead of remembering only the painful memories, I began to remember the conversations and the experiments. I began to remember the nuance because I could smell the place, and it's the same sun and the planes flying over. It was the same. And so more memories came, and I thought, oh, this is remote viewing. And then I went home, and I was just in complete shock for like 3 days. And I went home and I started researching it through the CIA declassified library.gov, the Freedom of Information Act website. And I started plugging in the right words, Inyo grow flame, remote viewing, psychoenergetics. I started plugging those words in, and I got thousands of pages of data, and I poured through it all, and I put together all the remote viewing stuff. And we had been dabbling in my tier 3 group on my Patreon with remote viewing for a little bit already. But then all those memories of being involved in that, so the other thing is they were using advanced technology on us that people don't know about right now. And I started to really kind of try to reverse engineer some of that stuff. I still am. There's still some laser experiments that I want to get to once these obelisks are completed and I get a manufacturing process and they're available for sale. This is a great technology. It's a great opportunity for people to buy them, and it's a great opportunity for me to turn a buck and make a living. And so I'm trying to get that in place. But once that happens, the idea is that it's part of a complete system, and the laser peripherals, the Ganzfeld technology with laser input, again, tuned to the Planck, light waves, tuned to the Planck in a cloud of waves, tuned to the static electricity, tuned to the Planck. You see, it's an entire system with binaurals, with visuals, and with the static out of the obelisk. It's an entire thing. It can heal. We should be able to induce out of body. We should be able to induce great remote viewing abilities. That's what I remember them experimenting with. But unpacking all that led me, and I thought, oh man, this is a whole book. And I wrote Beyond Sight about that trip. So the Beyond Sight is based on my trip to Inyokern. And here I am a year later, still unpacking, understanding the tech.
That's amazing. Well, the reason it's dramatic that you went to Inyokern and experienced that site is that your memories had been wiped. They tried to keep you from remembering what you had done in those Terra based, ground based years here in the
Yes,
program. And so you began to remember, and you're like, I think Inyokern is somewhere I was, and I see some buildings. And so you somehow bypassed their memory wipe, and then you and Tyler went with you to film it to show that you have already remembered before you came there. You already knew what it was going to be.
I knew the way around the street. I knew the streets. I knew the area. Um, Tyler got we got a lot of things on film. We interviewed. We got a lot of pictures, and it was more than I thought. I thought I was going to remember a few things, and that would be that. But I found the buildings. I set foot in one of the buildings that I was in a 20 and back. It was the freakiest experience. I did it in Seattle too. I went and found that place, but I couldn't set foot inside it. It's gated. But I went outside the door, and I didn't have anybody film it to prove that I was calling it out before I got there, what I did. So I was able to do that in Inyokern. It's like it was like pulling on a sweater. It was like pulling that string on a sweater, man. The whole thing it keeps coming. And so that's where I'm at. I'm digesting it and trying to reverse engineer it as fast as I can, the tech. And along the way, learning a lot, learning about it too.
Are your
Um,
memories from the SSP still coming back too, or are you just sort of delving into technology that comes off of that?
I do less interviews these days and I do less talking about it, but the memories are still there. The memories still come. And like it's a part of me now. It's the same way that you remember your life when something happens and you remember like, oh yeah, when I was a kid that happened. Like
Mm-hmm.
the SSP memories are still there. I still think about them off daily. I still remember the oddball thing now and then, but it's usually a small detail.
Because they regress you after your service in the program. They age regress you, and they put you back to the age where you were taken. So you were very young, and then you lived those 30 or so years again, essentially. But you were emotionally affected by, even if you didn't have the specific memories of the SSP, you were emotionally affected, and you were a completely different person. You were an adult in your mind, even though you were a kid in your physical body.
That's right. I was a mess when they put me back. I was a completely different person the next day. I was gone for one night, and 20 years to me was one night to them, 30 years. I look at it when I do the math, it was 33 years after the abduction that I got my memories back. I was just thinking about, as you were talking, I went, oh shit. It was 33 years. I was 43. I was taken when I was 10, and I was 43 when the memory recall happened. So right after all of it was over.
Right. So you're saying that in a way you're living two lives at the same time.
Absolutely. And a lot of people have a hard time getting their head around that. But my challenge is to go and prove it. So that's why I went to Inyokern, I went to Seattle, I've gone to the places to try to gather evidence. And I've gathered a lot more than just evidence. I've gathered, memory of advanced technologies and remote viewing abilities. And so I've been teaching it, and it's funny because it's a flavor of the month. Everybody's coming out being a remote viewer these days after I did.
Awesome, man.
There's a lot of remote viewing guys that are great. You look at Dick Allgaier, Future Forecasters, the Hawaiian Remote Viewers Guild, John Vivanco. There's a list, the Monroe Institute. There's a list of great remote viewing programs out there, all of them based on CRB. Farsight, Courtney Brown, Aziz Brown, Yemi Janae. Like, so those are my friends. They're all doing great. I have my own little blend of it, and I'm teaching it on my Patreon. Every week I do remote viewing meetings. I think it's an essential thing to learn. And once you get your head around the science of it, remote viewing opens the door to a lot of other things.
So for people who really need a scientific basis for them to take action toward doing something that's so woo-woo in our culture, they can look at Tony's explanation in this interview and in other places on his site, Scion. I'm sure will be a lot of good information. And Talks with Tony is his Patreon. He has a group there. One group or more than one group?
I got like four groups. So
Four
the
groups.
alpha group is the beginners. So if you've never done it before, you start at alpha. and then you graduate up. So I don't have some kind of 6 week course or certification. It's about practice. So the best way to become a remote viewer is to practice remote viewing all the time. So we do 2 targets a week. I put those out, and then on Sunday we gather up our data. We share it with each other, and then we do the reveal. And people get better over time. It doesn't take long, and we go over snippets of technique and what worked for you, what didn't. But they're in live groups. I always say that I can make a video on how to bench press, how to work on the bench press, and how to use the dumbbells. I can make an instruction video, and you can watch it every day, but you won't get in better shape. You have to actually go to the gym and lift the weights. And I can make a video on how to remote view, and you can watch it, and you can take a course, a 6 week course, but you won't get in any good shape until you remote view over and over again. So it's 2 a week for a year gets you to that 100 views level, and you're talking expert. That you get really good at it. You don't forget it at that point. It changes the more you do it. So that's what
So,
we do.
so that's what Talks with Tony on Patreon can help people do, is to give them a structure so that they will regularly practice remote viewing, which you have said in another interview anyone can do.
That's right. I've found people, your health matters, but I've had people that were not healthy that could remote view. And so it's about doing it. It's a muscle. That's all it is. We do it anyway. We have intuition. You have intuitive thoughts all the time. That's remote viewing. It's the same science. Your intuition that goes, "Oh, I don't think we should go today. I'm just gonna stay home." And then you find out that the party was a bust and it was terrible, right? You're like, "Oh boy, I'm sure glad we didn't do that." Your intuition told you that. You remote viewed it. It's the same science.
You slipped outside of time and space through the plonk. You looked at the future without even really consciously knowing it, and you saw it wasn't so good, and you just slipped back in and went, you know what? I'm not doing that.
Exactly. You touched in, you got an antenna, you got a few, and like I said, you hit some of the ping pong balls in the cup. That's all it was. You give off millions of electrons every second. All your cells are, all of you, everything. This is giving off charge. My shirt has a charge to it. All of it, everything does, all of it has charge. And most of the charge doesn't do anything, but some of them make it into the cup. It's a ping pong ball that makes it to the cup. And so when you were in a good state of mind, you're like, I don't know if I want to go to that party tonight. And
Yeah.
you're peaceful state of mind,
Yeah.
you hit some ping pong balls in the cup and you go, you know what? I don't think so. We're not going. Hey, we're not going. And you follow your intuition. And when it pans out, that's remote viewing. The other thing about remote viewing is because it's blind, you never know what it is. It's provable. The odds of you guessing what I have in my envelope are slim,
Right.
right?
Virtually
Yeah.
impossible to do that.
Let's do one, Jock. You want to do one real quick?
Yeah.
We're gonna.
And while you're doing that, well, let me just ask you a quick question about cacao, because this helps me connect to the muse as a writer. And I'm wondering if the monoatomic elements in the Peruvian soil where the cacao trees are growing is helping me get through the Planck distance chemically.
Well, some of that is monoatomics is it's causing you to emit more electrons. So that's what it is. So you're a machine that's if you're emitting a millivolt of electrons and you rewire it with monoatomics, there's less resistance. And so now you have 2 or 3 microns or millivolts. Here's your target, Jock.
Okay.
So you're no remote viewing protocol, no meditation, no nothing. The odds are you're not going to guess this. Okay. So there's a way to score it, and I would like you to describe any kind of elements or soft, hard, cloudy, gooey, liquidy, big, small, smell, no smell, and then just kind of guess at what the target could be. And your number is G639K7, excuse me, K672.
G six
G639.
G639 K672.
Yes,
And the reason you give a number like that is so that it's has no possible relationship to the target.
that's right. It's just a random set of numbers and letters that nobody else has got on their envelope this week.
Right.
Links you in a subconscious way to the targeter.
And you have set up that link between the numbers and the target just by your intention, right?
Yeah, there's methods of targeting, but yeah, basically, yes.
Yeah. And so it's fully from your intention that this could work. Otherwise, it wouldn't work because it has to be your intention to link that random series of numbers to the target.
So the numbers don't really matter. You don't need the numbers. It's a faster way to do it for a group of people.
Oh,
So
I
the
see.
idea is like if it was blank and I said just guess what I put in the
I
envelope,
see. I see. I
possible.
see.
But
So,
it's
but
it's a neat way to work.
but your intention, in other words, your the fact that you looked at the paper and you intended to look at what's on the paper so that
I have a
you could
question.
test somebody, that's what sets it up. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. Without the intention, it doesn't work.
Well, here's what it is. We have proof that you don't know what it is. So if you guess it, so the odds of you guessing what are in here are slim. It's very slim. The odds of you getting five aspects of this target correct
Right.
is 1 in 250,000. Well, I'm saying just for giggles, take a guess. What's your intuition tell you that this one is?
I have, okay.
I I don't mean to put you on the spot, buddy.
No, no, please. It's fine. It's absolutely perfect. Scientists have experimented on themselves throughout history, and I'm glad to be part of this. Now, what I saw virtually immediately was literally just a black circle. That's all I saw.
A black circle, big or small?
It was about this big,
So a little tiny
black circle,
black
flat,
circle.
just flat, and it's black. It's one shade, and that's it. That's all I saw. I didn't see anything fancy.
Um, let's have a look. So it's called What is Pi'ilani's Heiau like in the Kahuna Gardens on Maui? It's a step pyramid in the Hawaiian Islands. And it's
Okay.
called Pi'ilani's Heiau. And it's a big stone structure made out of small black rocks,
Oh,
volcanic rocks. So you did get an element of it. You got one of the rocks of it. Like it's made out of millions of little volcanic rocks, and it's a big step pyramid. It's called Pi'ilani's Heiau. My
interesting.
my my purpose there was for you to get it wrong because when we apply the protocols, when we do meditative state and we start to apply the protocols of data sheets and probing with the ideogram, we create ideogram and gestalts, and we kind of finesse and pry our way to the data through the plank. Our teams do beat better than 1 in 250,000 probability. We do get 5 to 7 correct aspects of the target and even sketches of the target accurately week in and week out. Every single week, we get descriptions of the target correct. Some people are off this week and on next week. People, their kids, they get running with the kids. They're late. I got to do my VR or my remote viewing session and they rush it. There's whatever. I just hurt my foot and I'm going to do this session. They're a little off. But for the most part, we're averaging 12 to 15 scores. And a 15 score is better than 1 in 250,000 on the way that I score it.
Yeah.
And so we do it every single week. We do it every single week, and people are hitting these targets. And when you take a group of 10 or 15 people and you've got the little round rock, the next one's got a step pyramid, the other one's got a grass hut, and you start overlapping the common denominators in the sessions, you start to get a really clear picture of what the targets are. You start to see really in remote, that's how remote viewing happens. It's your intuition. And when people get up there 40, 50 targets, they start to get really good at it. And we can start to see what happened there this morning, what's going to happen tonight, who's there right now, how many people are there, what are they thinking? What this mom is hungry, this kid's main, this kid wants to leave, they're perturbed. You start to really see details when the more people do this. There's my example.
I'm assuming that in your new book, Beyond Sight, you have a chapter or at least a bunch of intel on how the military has used remote viewers for decades.
Oh yeah, I have the history of remote viewing. No, the first remote viewing was 500 BC, was the Oracle of Delphi. There was a king that wanted to know which oracle was correct, and she remote viewed exactly what he was doing at the time he asked, miles away. So the first recorded instances was 500 BC. Remote viewing, psychoenergetics, psi ability has been with mankind the whole time. It's what we are. They've talked us out of believing that we can do these things. But remote viewing started in the 70s, you know what I mean? Officially in the United States. China was doing it, Russia was doing it. They went quite far at it. And the United States needed countermeasures and to understand what they were up against. So the Army INSCOM funded the research in the early 70s with Stanford Research Institute. It was Project Stargate was downriver from all that stuff.
So the
Yeah, in my
military,
book, I tell the history of it. There's a guide on how to do it in there. I
yeah.
tell a lot about and other things. Psychoenergetics are not just remote viewing the target, but perturbing the target, interacting with the target. And we do experiments on that too.
Yeah, I mean, the military using remote viewers and psychoenergetic processes shows that this is not nonsense. It shows because the military is not going to be doing things that are just hippies pretending to do something. They're going to be engaging in projects that actually have results. So
Project
we know this is real.
Project went on for like 20 years and they spent tens of millions of dollars. And when we look at the funding that they got back in the 80s, it was the equivalent to like $30 million today. So they were funded to do these projects. They had great results. And as soon as the indication is that as soon as they figured out how to hurt people at a distance, it became classified. They canceled it and said, nope, nothing to see here. And it became classified, right, in the 90s. So from the 70s to the 90s, they were active in it. There's a lot of evidence that our soldiers, our special forces, are using remote viewing techniques in combat.
Right. So because if you can view the enemy where they are, then you've basically got the upper hand. So
Psychically. That's right. Yep. And there are countermeasures too. There's a lot to it.
it's amazing to think what might be going on behind the scenes when remote viewers for different factions of governments and then individuals doing their own remote viewing. It's and most people are just going to work and trying to make money to live and buying some french fries on the way home to try and quell their hunger. They're not thinking about the fact that behind the scenes there's remote viewers engaged in maybe not a war but a chess game of intentions, different agendas manifesting. And your book could be a window into, I think it would be an amazing window for people into this incredible chess game that's going on behind the scenes.
I show a lot of technology in there about remote viewing, especially countermeasures and remote influencing, and gave real world circumstances that is being used. I think a lot of people are unaware of it, and I'm proud of the work I did. That book isn't formatted as good as I wanted it to be, but it doesn't matter. The content is so dense, and I put a lot of work into it, and it's very, very, very useful information to anybody. And so that's kind of where I'm at, man. That's been my last couple years after being an SSP whistleblower for 10 years. I still do it. I'm going on doing some talks this year on that. And disclosure is right around the corner. At a certain point, I have to have a career beyond it because they're going to disclose and they're going to give us the mainstream version of it. And that's it. We'll be chopped liver. Guys like me will be chopped liver when they tell us about the space program and about ETs up there. And, we're all going to have a whole lot on our plate to learn. And so me just unpacking these sciences are where I'm going. And it's been very good so far. Very promising, the stuff I'm working on.
That's awesome. And you've also got your woodworking that you do, and that's a meditative process.
Well, now it's not woodworking. Now I'm building obelisks. So I have to get a whole shop together for that. It's messy and it's hard to get some of the ingredients. It's hard. I could use all the quartz I can get, but the ingredients are there, and I'll be building a bunch of them. My goal is to have, 5 or 10 of them available with all the electronics and everything completed by the end of the month. I have some conferences coming up, and I'm going to sell them at conferences and offer them on Scion.com. The other thing is making them pretty. So nobody wants to buy a chunk of barium titanate, a gray chunk of plastic looking stuff. So we need to make it look aesthetically pleasing so you're proud to have it in your living room or your bedroom where you would broadcast the field that's good for you.
Well, you have a conference coming up in Sedona at the end of the month. I think I think you're talking on the 28th or the 29th.
29th, it's Rise of the Guardians conference. It's put on by Rion De Royan from Team Light. Everybody will be there. The gang's all there. Good conference, some really good speakers showing up. He's going to have some post workshops. They got stuff going on at night, like dances at night. Like it's a really active conference, and it's here in Sedona. It's good. I believe you can check it out on teamlight.com or teamlightstore.com. Any of those websites will take you to link to where it's at. So if you're in Sedona, come by at the end of the month.
Yeah, it's looks like a really good conference. I'm going to be in Muley Point, Utah, doing some diagnosis of the terrain in the last week of the month. So I'll try to zip down to Sedona to say hi and at least maybe see if you have time to go on a hike or something. But I don't know if I'll be able to go to the conference because I don't know if I have time. But I'll try to get down there for the conference and see what you guys are doing in these workshops.
Yeah, look me up. Pop in, man. It'd be great to hang out with you, Jock.
That'd be awesome. Well, Tony, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I was really excited to have you talk about your book and all your amazing intel that you've sort of come up with in your talks with Dan Winter, and then based on your 30 or so years in the SSP and all that experience that you've had. It's just amazing to be able to have all this intel sort of come at us in a nice hour and a half or so interview. It's fantastic. And don't worry about dumping too much info on us at once. We can just watch it over again. It's all right. So, all
Thanks. Thanks.
right, man. Great to have you, and we'll see you around the universe. Okay.
You bet, man. Great seeing you. Great seeing you again, Jock.
Great
Thanks
seeing
for
you.
having me on, brother.
Okay.
Take
Bye bye.